Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today for the second People's Garden webinar on composting awareness. I am Nina Bhattacharya. I'm the People's Garden Initiative Coordinator with the USDA Office of Urban Agriculture and Innovative Production. The office is a USDA-wide resource that supports producers through grants, agreements, a federal advisory committee, and of course, the People's Garden Initiative. So before we get started today, I do want to make a couple of announcements. First, our office, the Office of Urban Agriculture and Innovative Production, has an open funding opportunity very relevant to the topic of today's webinar for composting and food waste reduction cooperative agreements. So we invite local governments, tribes, and schools to apply by June 15th. Visit usda.gov/urban to learn more. In addition, I do want to encourage gardens to register for free for the People's Garden Initiative. We connect gardens from across the country and also provide really helpful information and resources such as our webinar series. So now switching gears to today's topic of composting awareness, we have a great group of speakers lined up who will be providing their expertise in reducing food waste and producing rich compost that can provide a myriad of benefits for your garden and community. There will be speakers who touch upon resources available through the federal government and our partners, along with technical information from practitioners who are working on the ground in their communities and serving their communities. So our goal for this webinar is to provide a snapshot of activities that are happening across the country that you can use, dig a little deeper, tailor for your communities, see what works. So a few housekeeping items. Please place any questions or comments in the Q&A box by clicking the icon at the bottom of your screen. The recorded webinar will be posted to the People's Garden website. If you're interested in receiving more information from our office, please sign up for email updates by visiting farmers.gov/urban. You will receive information about upcoming webinars, our Office of Urban Ag and Innovative Production newsletter, and other information to stay engaged. So in closing for this intro, I do want to highlight an important item. While we meet today on a virtual platform, we would like to take a moment to honor the ancestral stewards of all the lands that we are on today and their descendants living in tribes, nations, bands, pueblos, communities, or native villages around the country. Their collective wisdom and experience really has guided environmental stewardship in this country to this day, including sustainable practices we encourage through the People's Garden Initiative, and we'll be discussing in this webinar series. So with that, let's talk about one of those practices, composting. For our first speaker, I would like to introduce Elana Goldstein from the Environmental Protection Agency, Sustainable Management of Food, Mid-Atlantic region. Elana will provide helpful background information on the basics of composting. What is it? How does it work? Why do it? And more. So with that, I'm going to share my screen with Elana's slides and invite her to take the floor. Elana.
Thank you, Nina. So as Nina mentioned, I'm Elana Goldstein, and I work at the Environmental Protection Agency, where I focus on efforts to reduce wasted food. I'm also a very passionate composter and a community gardener, which is why I'm really excited to be here today. 2 weeks ago was International Compost Awareness Week. It's an annual week to raise awareness about the importance of composting and the benefits of using compost. And the image you see here was this year's winning poster. So I wanted to share it today. It says, "Compost for healthier soil, healthier food." And today we're going to talk all about compost for healthier soil and food and hear about some of the neat composting, community composting initiatives going on. Next slide. I'm going to cover what is compost and composting, how it works, why you should compost, how to use it, and different ways we can compost. We could definitely spend at least an hour or more talking about all of these, but today we're just going to do an overview given the time. Next slide. What is compost? Compost is the dark, crumbly, earthy smelling material produced by the natural decomposition of organic materials like leaves, garden trimmings, and food scraps. Next slide. And composting is the controlled aerobic decomposition process that converts those organic materials into a nutrient-rich living soil amendment. Methods can include hot or active composting, passive or cold composting, and vermicomposting, which is composting with worms. Next slide. How does composting work? Composting is nature's way of recycling. In a forest, the leaves drop in the fall and they decompose into the soil. In a composting pile, we can speed up this process by ensuring specific conditions. And so during the composting process, what happens is bacteria and fungi and other microbes feed on the organic materials in a pile, and they break down those materials. These beneficial microbes use carbon and nitrogen to grow and reproduce, water to move around and digest, and oxygen to breathe. Unfortunately, we don't have time to get into vermicomposting today, one of my favorite topics, but if you're interested in it, I recommend checking out the fantastic resources and books from Rhonda Sherman, who's an extension specialist at North Carolina State University. Next slide. The composting recipe. So the ingredients for the composting recipe look like this. You'll need browns, which are materials relatively high in carbon, such as fall leaves, twigs, straw, shredded newspaper, and wood chips. Greens, which are materials relatively high in nitrogen, such as food scraps and grass clippings. Water, moisture, and air. You want to ensure you have the right balance in your recipe. So it's important to add 2 to 3 parts of browns to 1 part greens, to use a variety of browns to increase the air circulation in your pile, and to chop up the bigger pieces you're adding to your pile to make it easier for the microbes to break them down and speed up your composting process. Next slide. There are different stages in the composting process that your pile will pass through once the ingredients are added and mixed. Keep in mind the time shown in this graph is going to change depending on both the size and the active management of your pile. So first in your pile, the temperature rises and bacteria and fungi rapidly reproduce and start to digest the organic matter. Within a few days, as the temperature continues to climb, the pile will enter the active composting stage. Here, the temperature will peak, the food is consumed and broken down, and weed seeds and pathogens are destroyed. You want your pile to get above 104 degrees Fahrenheit, but stay below 160 degrees Fahrenheit. Lastly, the pile will enter the curing stage. The temperature will start to come down and the organic material in the pile will start to stabilize. Curing is important as it allows the process to come to an end. While we don't have time to cover all the aspects of the composting process today, I want to add that it's important to turn your pile and also ensure adequate moisture and air throughout the process to reduce odor and other potential issues. Next slide. Why compost? Why are we here today? Well, I want to focus on 4 reasons, especially as we're talking about community composting. One is to reduce waste, keep organic materials out of our landfills. 2, protect our climate and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. 3, build healthy soil, which, as I said, is nature's way of recycling. And 4, grow your community. Next slide. So first, let's discuss reducing waste. We waste a lot of food in the United States. The recent EPA wasted food report states that 66 million tons of wasted food was generated in the food retail, food service, and residential sectors in 2019. And most of this waste, about 60% of it, was sent to landfills. Food is lost all along the supply chain, and therefore the energy, resources, and money that went into producing and processing and packaging and transporting it all are wasted too. Ideally, we want to prevent food from being wasted in the first place, learn how to store food so it lasts longer, understand our date labels, and more. But we know that more food reaches landfills and incinerators than any other material. And you can see here in this EPA graphic that about 24% of materials landfilled in 2018 were food, about 7% were yard trimmings, 8% wood, and another 12% paper and paperboard. And only about 8% of our organic materials are currently composted. But if you add up all those slices, we could be composting about 40% of the materials that are currently ending up in our landfills. So let's start thinking about food and other organic materials as resources rather than as waste. Next slide. The second reason to compost I mentioned is protecting the climate. So when food and other organics decompose in landfills, the process generates methane, which is a really powerful greenhouse gas that contributes to climate change. And landfills are the third largest emitter of methane emissions in the United States. By diverting these organic materials from landfills and composting them instead, it's an action that each of us can take to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and therefore climate change. Next slide. In addition to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, we can use compost to build healthier soils. When you add compost to your garden beds, it improves soil health, it promotes plant growth, it helps reduce soil erosion, suppresses plant diseases, and reduces the need for chemical fertilizers and pesticides, amongst a whole list of other things that you can read on the slide. And you can mix compost into the soil, or you can use it as a mulch or a top cover. Next slide. I want to briefly cover the ways in which you can compost. And you can see the examples in the photos here on the right side of the slide. There's tumblers and worms and bins and windrows. So we have small to medium scale systems that can include homes and schools, communities, gardens, farms, and businesses, and large scale systems that can include regional centralized facilities. There's no one size that fits all. Some of these locations and facilities just compost yard trimmings, and others compost food scraps as well. Some programs may include drop-off sites, others may include curbside collection. Because no one size meets all our composting needs, we need to support a diversified approach, and that approach should include community composting. Next slide. The Institute for Local Self-Reliance, who leads a national composting coalition and offers many helpful resources in this space, describes community composting as, quote, keeping the process as local as possible while engaging the community through participation and education. Because compost is also used in the same community where it's produced in community composting helps communities grow, creates greener neighborhoods, jobs, community engagement, and local soils that in turn can be used to grow healthier food. Next slide. So with that, I wanted to share a few EPA and partner resources. I encourage you to check out our website, the Sustainable Management of Food EPA website, which has a lot of different resources and tools, as well as our funding page. And below that are instructions on how to sign up for our newsletter. There are several open EPA funding opportunities at the moment that could encompass community composting, including one in New England and one in the Mid-Atlantic. And we're also working on a social marketing toolkit on composting food scraps in your community that will be coming soon. Lastly, I want to make a pitch for one of our partners, the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. They are also an EPA grantee, and they offer so many amazing community composting resources, including their neighborhood soil rebuilders, composting training program, and a new online certificate. Next slide. And with that, here is my contact info. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions or want to learn more. And thank you for allowing me to speak to you all today. And I'll turn it back to you, Nina.
Thanks so much, Elana. That was a great foundation for the rest of the webinar. Next up, we have Jean Buzby. She is the USDA Food Loss and Waste Liaison from the Office of the Chief Economist. Jean is our leading expert at USDA in all things food loss and waste, and will cover federal resources that are available to address this really important issue. So Jean, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Nina, for inviting me to be on this important webinar. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm going to split my presentation into two parts. The first, I'll share a little bit about the U.S. Department of Agriculture and what we do for food loss and waste and composting in particular. And then I will touch on the current funding opportunities by different USDA, EPA, and some other agencies. And so without further ado, next slide, please. Let's dive into what USDA is doing. First of all, many of our efforts touch on or relate to food loss and waste as part of normal operating business. And I like to split it into basically 4 different kinds of areas: program funding, which will focus mostly here, research and research funding, outreach, and regulatory guidance. Next. Please. Thank you. And just as Elana mentioned, the magnitude of the problem domestically, I just wanted to say that globally, food loss and waste really adds up as well. It's estimated to be 1.3 billion tons each year at a cost of $936 billion. And it is also associated with 8 to 10% of all greenhouse gas emissions from human activity. Also, about a quarter of all fresh water used by agriculture for crop production each year is associated with food loss and waste. Next slide, please. So one of the 4 big areas where USDA participates is program funding. And we manage all sorts of competitive funding programs and administer credit and loan programs. And just in general, if you're looking for some funding, go to grants.gov, and you can search for words like composting, and that will not only help direct you to some of our programs, but other federal agencies as well. One in particular that I want to point out to you is in our Office of Urban Agriculture and Innovative Production. They have a composting and food waste reduction cooperative agreements that 30 million over 3 years. We're now, the second year is available now, and there's a call for applications through June 15th. And by the way, this office also has urban agriculture grants that could also include some composting. Our Rural Development Agency also has a guideline of all food loss and waste programs that touch on that, and some would include composting as well. And what I'm going to do is, after the webinar in the next few days, Elana and I have put together a list of some program funding opportunities that I'll be sending you, and that will also have this rural development guide that I mentioned. Next slide, please. We also at USDA have research and research funding. For example, our Agriculture Research Service, which is our main in-house research agency. We have something like 3,000 bench scientists and research labs across the country. And they do, and of course, not everyone is working on food loss and waste, but there are really great innovations coming out of that, such as cultivars like the strawberry, that keepsake strawberry that's more flavorful and has longer shelf life, and also innovations in packaging and equipment as well. And our National Institutes of Food and Agriculture is our main extramural funding agency, and I'll get back to that, but they have many different opportunities, including small business innovation research funding, which is in 2 phases, one to get the innovation rolling, and the second one is to get it commercialized. And by the way, EPA also has SBIR funding as well. Now, USDA has another agency called the Economic Research Service, which really focuses on economic research and has been estimating food loss at the retail and consumer levels. Next slide. We also do a wide range of outreach, and including with EPA, we have a U.S. Food Loss and Waste 2030 Champions program. And that's where businesses voluntarily commit to publicly announce that they are moving towards reducing food loss and waste in their own U.S. operations in half by 2030, which, by the way, is a national goal. And many of these champions are composting food scraps as well. And if you search for USDA 2030 champions and double click on each logo, you can see what each champion's doing. These are big businesses in many cases, such as Hilton Hotels and Kroger and Disney resorts, for example. We've also hosted innovation fairs the past 2 years. For the one that was last September, you can still register for free and watch it on demand. And you can see what some of those champions are doing and some of the innovations that we have funded in-house. And also you can see 3 of the virtual booths are for composting and food waste reduction awardees. So you can check out what they're doing. So in addition to roundtables, there's also a whole host of materials available on their website, and I'll provide the link later on my last slide. Next slide, please. I just want to point out that our Food Safety Inspection Service does have a Food Keeper app, and that provides guidance on handling, preparation, and storage for more than 650 food and beverage items. Lots of cool videos there as well. And by the way, we do have some composting videos on our USDA web channel as well. Next slide. One of the things I do as a food loss and waste liaison is also help spread the word that they're about the liability protection for donating wholesome food. Next slide. The last of the four things, the big buckets that USDA is doing, touching on food loss and waste, is regulatory guidance. Our Food Safety Inspection Service, for example, provides guidance on food product date labeling, because there's a lot of confusion about best by, sell by, and so forth, that in some cases leads to consumers throwing out perfectly wholesome food prematurely. And we're also updating other kinds of guidance. Next slide. I just want to say that food loss and waste is really complex, and it's going to take many different solutions from farm to table in both the public and private sector to reach our national 2030 goal. And I really want to emphasize that everyone has a role to play. I mean, even there's, getting things happening at the local level, for example. There even are the reviewers on our panels to go over our applications. There's so many different ways that people can play a role, including composting food scraps. Also wanted to mention that if you have excess food from your gardens, there's ampleharvest.org, which if you put in your zip code, it can tell you where you can donate your excess produce. But we are helping address food loss and waste through programs, policy, and guidance. And again, that's also including some on composting as well. And as I mentioned, there's other range of federal funding opportunities at grants.gov. Let's turn now to the second part of my presentation, which will be a little bit shorter. And next slide, I just want to pause there, Nina. Thanks. So in general, when you're thinking about all these funding opportunities, I know it can be a little daunting at first, but there are some opportunities that are open right now. There's some that are upcoming, and then there's some that are recurring. Like, for example, they may happen annually for 5 years or so forth. Right now, EPA has several current funding opportunities, and some of those are by region or specific to relationships within a region, such as their Region 3. They have a Mid-Atlantic Sustainable Materials Management funding opportunity, and that has availability of $150,000 in grant funding, with applications due on July 14th. So that's around the corner. And as I said, we're going to be sending a list that can kind of point you in the right direction on a snapshot of many of these upcoming and current funding opportunities. And as I mentioned, there's also, EPA has that small business innovation research similar to what we have at our USDA. They also have all sorts of different opportunities. And let me just say that it may not always say composting specifically in a funding opportunity, but if you can be creative, you can sometimes work it in and have a strong application. And that could be true in some of the climate pollution reduction grants for EPA, for example, or in some of the USDA opportunities as well. We really don't have time to go too deep, but as I mentioned, USDA has the composting and food waste reduction cooperative agreements open right now through June 15th. We also have sustainable agriculture systems innovation, or that's really to promote transformational change in the U.S. food and ag system. But anyway, that's open too through July 13th. Again, we'll follow through with a listing of these things. I wish there was more time to go through. As I said, composting could also be woven into many other the opportunities. Like, for example, USDA has farm to school grants. Well, those applications, for example, could consider what you use food scraps out of the school cafeteria, you compost it and put it in school gardens. There's many creative ways that applications can take as far as their approach. I think I'll end there, but thank you so much for your time. It's my pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much, Jean. As Jean mentioned, we'll be following up with additional resources. Another really just great way to stay up to date on upcoming funding opportunities is to sign up for various email newsletters. I had mentioned the Office of Urban Ag and Innovative Productions newsletter at the start of this webinar, but a lot of our USDA web pages, you can scroll down, you can see a subscribe to and make sure to sign up to stay up to date. So with that, we're going to be inviting two speakers from New York City's Governor Island. The first is Tatiana Morin. She's the co-founder and director of Urban Soils Institute. Through her work on Governor's Island, Tatiana is taking a whole ecosystem approach to food production with her People's Garden that will be both a stewardship and educational opportunity for the public. So we're really pleased to have Tatiana here, and it looks like it may be Igor Bronze who's stepping in for her. I see he's popped up. So Igor, apologies on that, but the floor is yours if you would like to cover the presentation.
Hey, I'm sorry about that. Tatiana is running to her computer right now, and she will be there very soon. I was going to ask if it would be possible for Marisa to take the first half of the presentation instead, because she'll be ready in a few minutes.
Thank you, Igor. Yeah, so Marisa, are you ready to go?
Yes.
Okay, great. Let me navigate to your slides and we'll get that going right now. So we're switching gears just a little bit here. You know, Marisa is part 2 to the Governor's Island highlight. She is the co-founder and executive director of Earth Matter and is bringing some really valuable experience to managing community compost teams. She also has a really helpful checklist that you can take with you and use in your own community. So with that, Marisa, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Very honored to be part of this presentation, and I'm coming in at the angle of being a community gardener trainee of compost educators and community composters, and we were very honored to have 10 people from 10 different community gardens in New York City who are all composting, that were part of our spring cohort that actually helped to produce this PowerPoint. Next slide, please. So this is what we all came up with as a collaboration. You can't do it alone. So our goal for community composting is to make sure that you have at least 2 or 3 or 4 people in your community garden that is going to be able to help you be able to manage your system. Minimally, you should have buy-in from the leadership that people want to have compost in their garden and they've allocated the space to do that. And even if you think you have 3 or 4 people, always be on the lookout for new volunteers or new people that could be part of the team. Next slide, please. We want to make sure that you know where you're going to be sourcing your materials. Are you going to have it mostly from your garden? Are you going to be having it from external sources like a food scrap drop-off? And this slide shows you that there's many different kinds of community composting systems. If you have an existing system, that's great. Sometimes people will say, well, it's just not big enough because we have so much interest in scaling up. Or you may not have any system and you're saying, well, what system is best for me? And we like to say at Earth Matter that it's all the systems are good systems. It's really just about what kind of device will suit your community garden and your community operation the best. So on the top here, we have a small one. So if you're really only talking about 3 or 4 people participating, like an earth machine, where it's a 3-in-1, kind of 3 2-in-1 phases of the compost decomposition levels are in one bin. We often recommend 3-bin systems, believe it or not. Those are easier than 3-in-1 because you can separate the bin levels. So inputs, stuff that's curing, and ready compost. The garbage can, there's advantages to things that are going to be rodent deterrents. And down below, you have your traditional community garden, if you really are going to be able to engage 20 or 30 families or all your garden members and you're on a larger scale. So we really want to make sure that you have everything you need. A garden fork is not the same as a pitchfork that is used, a manure fork. So there's certain things in this here you can go on your own that we recommend. And then there's some things that are just nice. Next slide, please. So managing your compost site. Now, the previous speaker had talked about what the ingredients are in the compost, and that's where your team comes in, because it's really about understanding what is going to help accelerate your compost process. If you don't have enough moisture, it's going to get arrested. If there's too much moisture, then you're going to have smelly conditions, and that's going to shut down your operation. People are going to think that it's really not a good thing to have in your garden. So we want to make sure that your team is understanding some of the basic recipe elements. However, it's like cooking. In a recipe that I make with a muffin, I might just say, you know, it's just a little bit too dry. I'm going to add a little bit more buttermilk. Or I might say, you know what, the cookie dough, you know, it just really needs a little bit more flour. So when you're making your community compost operation, you really want to communicate with each other, and you want to make sure if you're going to err on the side of anything, it's going to be browns, because you do want to make sure that everybody in your garden, anybody that comes around the site is going to feel comfortable, and it's not going to make people say, you know what, this is not working for us. You might say, what are you talking about? What smell? But other people are going to know that there's, you know, your recipe needs adjusting. So managing your compost site just might mean that, you know, somebody's going to go there once a week. It's up to you and your team to determine how actively or passively it is that you're managing your system, and that's going to be an individual level. The more you manage it, the faster you'll get your compost. Next slide. So I talked about this a little bit earlier. When you set up a community composting system, you're a public facing entity. Any kind of situation you have that's going to attract a rodent is going to shut you down. And so we want to make sure that you've taken every possible way that you can to deter those rodents, whether it's, we can't use plastic because the rats will eat through it. We need to put some kind of a wire mesh situation. Or maybe you might have to say, we're getting too many food scraps. We don't have enough browns. We've had a shortage of leaves because it's August. So you may have to say, you know what? Closed until further notice as far as food scrap goes. We're only taking in green yard waste. Another thing could be that the garden, even though they said they want to have a composting system, hasn't really allowed you the space to be able to do your compost dance. So you really need to make sure that you have what you need as a team to be able to function and to be able to thrive in order to make your compost. The other thing that's listed on this page is the amount of processors. You may have a lot of people that want to drop off, like a dry cleaner system, but if you don't have enough people that are actually making the compost, then it won't work. Okay, I mean, you could call it a passive system, which is fine, but it's going to limit how much material you're taking in. Next slide, please. Everybody wants to know when it's done and how can I use it? How much do I need to put on my garden beds or my street tree? A lot of people want to say, is it ready in 24 hours? There's some kind of composting machines that have those kind of claims. Some people want to say it's 3 months. We like to say it's at least a year, especially if you're talking about a backyard system where your temperatures are not higher than 113 degrees. Doesn't mean it's not the best compost in the world. Vermicompost and mesophilic compost devices are my favorite. I like them a lot more than the thermophilic compost because it's allowing the macroorganisms as well as the microorganisms to really decompose all that matter. So anyway, let's say it's a year and a half, and it looks really good. You can do all kinds of tests, like a baggie test. If you open the bag after 3 days and it doesn't smell of ammonia, you can go ahead and sift it and apply it to your garden bed. You have different size screeners that you can use depending if you want to do a soil start mix for seedlings, put in your garden beds, or maybe you don't even need to sift it because you're going to be putting it on more of like a perennial bed that is fine to have mulch with big, what we call overs, the carbon that hasn't broken down. It can be used for a lot of different things. If your soil is poor, add copious amounts, up to 1/4 inch, a couple times a year until you feel that it's friable, that you've got humus that really feels, I was going to say taste, I mean, is really in a good state. If you have really good soil, you can apply about 1/8 of an inch in the fall to let it sink down over the winter. You can apply compost anytime, but your plants, especially if you're growing a lot of nitrogen loving plants like corn or tomatoes or eggplant, all those annuals that you love, it takes some of the nitrogen out of the soil, so it does need to get replenished. Next, please. Okay, so everything I said is in these slides plus more, and this is the summary where you can go back if you would like to just go and review what are the different aspects that our community gardeners have come up with. And I want to thank them. They're my heroes because they're providing a community service for many people, many households in New York. And they do it because they see themselves as people that are agents of positive change. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Marisa. That was a wonderful presentation. Really appreciate it. And a wonderful checklist that people can go back to and have handy for their own communities. With that, Igor, I'm just kind of doing a check-in if Tatiana was able to join us.
Hey, yep, Tatiana's there. She is actually in the same room as Marisa right now. So
Well, there you are.
there she
Great. Okay, let me navigate back to your slides. Just give me 1 second and then we'll get you on. Okay, so sharing my screen right now. And Tatiana, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. I'm Tatiana Morin, the director of the Urban Soils Institute, which is an ever-growing clearinghouse and platform for soils and people of all disciplines and backgrounds. We'd like to create access points for education, information exchange, interpretation, engagement, knowledge, and exploration of soils, urban and non. It's a continuous build by the demand and resources basically created by soils and people. And our belief is that soils as a common resource don't really belong in any category and don't stick to just the sciences alone, and that cross-disciplinary collaborative frameworks are how we find and develop sustainable futures based on holistic health of humans as a part of nature, supporting both the built and non-built environments. I'd like to really thank USDA and NRCS for making the People's Garden possible and building this community, and we're really honored and excited to be part of that and this webinar today. So we're here to talk about the hope and vision and model and benefits of ecosystem-based food production. Next slide, please. The People's Garden is what kind of gave us an inspiration to, give more meaning to what a garden is in the city. With a target of resiliency for the food supply chain, we envisioned to create a garden that invited an ecosystem to be kind of the foundational framework for the garden itself. So an ecosystem that supports the food production that's expected in a typical garden in the city. Next slide, please. So through the difficulty of understanding and facing the challenges that have to do with sustainability, climate change, anthropogenic climate change, and food security and food sovereignty, we also are having a problem maybe even grasping what sustainability really means to us in the city, as we are kind of, our vision is kind of maybe limited by the comfort zone and the quality of life that we're used to in the city, and how do we understand nature as a part of that, when we have our daily life ingrained in kind of the system that we're living with today. And so to address this, we feel like soils and looking to ecosystems that they support can teach us a lot in understanding the scope of the potential for sustainability in the cities. And through that, we mean basically metabolism repair. So you have a metabolism of a natural system like an ecosystem, and that translates to the metabolism repair of a city. As the soil become the centerpiece that supports both the built and the non-built environment, it is not a difficult translation to put ecosystems and food production hand in hand. Next slide, please. And in saying that, we live in a coastal area, coastal city, and as a lot of cities, there are different types of ecosystems that have thrived in that area or continue to thrive. And so our idea also was to look at maybe a patchwork or a quilt of different types of ecosystems. Many times when people think of soils, they think of agricultural soils, but here we like to impress upon the fact that it's not soil, it's soils, because soils provide different ecosystem functions for different types of ecosystems. And so for city to think about sustainable solutions, it's great to think about creating a complex of diverse different ecosystems all working together within the built environment. A constructed wetland, a green roof, a floating barge, a native forest, all these things that actually can also become food gardens. Next slide, please. So the idea behind the ecosystem-based approach for gardening is that you do have the nutrient cycles and the food web functioning in a holistic way. So you have parts that become part of a whole. And this is what helps soil develop and become strong and become resilient to changes in your regular backyard or community garden. These are the elements that create biodiversity that become the immune system for your garden and your environment surrounding you, and become your resiliency guarantee when things change and when things go awry. Next slide, please. So here's just a little bit of a fun slide to think about the possibilities when you think about ecosystem-based gardening, and the biodiversity that you gain from treating your garden as an ecosystem also translates to the biodiversity and the diverse food sources that become part of your health. So a diverse garden equals diverse food equals a healthy biodiverse immune system for your garden, which also translates to a much stronger immune system for yourself as well. We have not yet been able to incorporate the animal in our ecosystem-based garden that we're proposing through the People's Garden, but that is not a far stretch to think about in the future. Next slide, please. So again, just to emphasize the fact that, the biota, as a friend of mine likes to say, the biota runs the planet. And so when you give them habitat, then you start to create a holistic ecosystem that is resilient on its own. And with biota runs the planet, then the gardening becomes much easier for you, because you let the ecosystem translate its nutrients and immunity through itself. So you act less as a boss to your garden, but more as a participant of your garden and a recipient of the health that's generated from that, giving you food, water, medicine, wood and fiber. And you also offer a lens then into understanding your part in the nature, as opposed to someone who comes to witness it on the weekend when you can pull up your carrots. Next slide, please. So where do you start in a city like New York? It's called upcycling and reuse. We've got phenomenal compost being generated in New York City, people that aren't afraid of taking waste and making it into something useful. That's what nature does all the time, decomposition to composition. Taking styrofoam and creating Gaia soil, lightweight rooftop soil that is used by many people who are building green infrastructure these days. That's Igor is on the call today, and he'll be able to explain that more in the question and chats. We've got water sources, accessing rooftops to help irrigate the gardens, and something like the Pure Soils Bank, which is all the clean sediments that are excavated under 30 feet of the surface that are pristine glacial sediments that can be used with compost to create soils for our newly built ecosystems. Next slide, please. So this is what our concept turned out to be, to create a people's garden that has stewardship, educational opportunities, and an adaptive kind of hybrid collective where ecological benefits and food go hand in hand. So our idea was to capture stormwater runoff off rooftops and put it towards a floating wetland that requires no excavation. It's filled with ultralight Gaia soil that reuses styrofoam as a medium for microfilm development, so that you can have biota and microfauna growing in there to support an soil's health and to grow native vegetation that also can then become a forageable food practice. You can grow wild rice in there, all different types of native plants that are edible. Then the runoff off this stormwater catchment system goes into a series of beds that also represent different types of ecosystem. The idea that each bed will house a different type of ecosystem, including also something that we're calling our contamination amendment beds. So to be able to let people see and for themselves how soils that have been contaminated, they are not naturally contaminated, we have contaminated them, are a buffer to our health and can actually recover through different amendments that can be applied. Next slide, please. So we took this concept to Governor's Island, where on the left-hand side, you can see, yes, there's green space, but it's quite inert or less productive in terms of its biodiversity and its ecological productivity, and does not offer much in terms of improving anything in terms of food security or food sovereignty. The idea there is to capture the rainwater off the rooftops and funnel it to this beautiful floating wetland that houses not only native habitat and pollinators, but also produces forageable edible foods, and then translates again to the other raised beds that house different ecosystems. Next slide, please. And beyond that, this is an invitation to build community. So we are partnering with many organizations to help build programming and let this become a living laboratory for anybody who becomes involved. It should also be a self-guided garden that through experience and observation that can either be, dictated by a curriculum, or it could be just self-taught. You can start to observe the ecosystem's functions and benefits and become stewards of the garden and involve different types of educational programming. Next slide, please. It is housed at what we call our art extension service house that we partnered with Swale in Nolan Park here at Governor's Island. And this is a platform where scientists and artists get together to explore soils further. So it will become an integrated part of their artist residency program. Next slide, please. So again, this is an opportunity to use this garden as an educational tool for understanding ecosystem integration into the city, and use that as a new model for food productive gardens that can be adaptable to any application. You're not limited to just a backyard. Now you can take advantage of roadways, sidewalks, under highways, you name it, rooftops. So the idea is to now create this model that will expand throughout the city and other cities. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you for your attention, and thank you to USDA and RCS for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, and what a wonderful story to tell on the work that's being done in Governor's Island for flagship People's Gardens, and also the community composting element as well. So I would like to now turn it over to the City of Philadelphia staff who have been awarded composting food waste reduction agreements and are doing some really amazing work. First, we have Ash Richards, who's the Director of Urban Agriculture's Philadelphia Parks and Recreation Sustainability Office, and she will be presenting on Farm Philly program and the community composting program. So Ash, I will turn it over to you, and I am pulling up your slides now.
Awesome. Thanks, Nina. Thanks, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to also time myself, make sure I stay within the time confines. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Again, my name is Ash Richards. My pronouns are actually they, them, not she, her. And again, I'm the program or the director of the Urban Agriculture Program at Parks and Recreation. I also run the Farm Philly program, so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Before I begin, I want to acknowledge the land that we steward here and currently known as Philadelphia, and that has been home to and cared for by the Lenape people of Lenapehoking. And at Farm Philly, of course, we recognize the tribe's strength and history to resistance to ongoing colonization, and we commit to honoring their history, presence, and future. Next slide. Now, to get into my presentation, first we'll start off with a little bit of background with Farm Philly. Farm Philly is the urban agriculture program of Parks and Recreation. Our mission is to connect residents to the natural world and to support the self-determination and sovereignty of communities to grow their own food. We provide programming and material support to community gardens and farms and residents located across the city. Next slide. And we also have 4 primary goals, of course, which include, firstly, supporting residents and communities to design and lead their own agriculture projects. Next slide. Second, to redistribute resources to communities impacted by historical and ongoing disinvestment, food apartheid, and displacement. Next slide. Ensuring the equitable distribution of food produced on all public land, including our own public farm, Carousel House Farm. And then next slide. And of course, to committing to collaborative food policy development that elevates urban agriculture as a permanent, viable, and productive land use within the city of Philadelphia. We just completed our first comprehensive urban agriculture plan for the city, and we have a total of 7 public-facing programs that we are investing in. And this is a part of our mission to create agricultural infrastructure in Philadelphia that are utilized as public goods or public services. And the Community Compost Network is one of them. So we're going to get into that. Next slide. So the Community Compost Network, or CCN, began in 2019 as an answer to the question of how do we do composting on a community level. We already have an organic recycling center that generates very large scale leafy compost, but residents can't currently or haven't been in the past been able to drop off food there to be composted, and the facility is actually not even permitted or designed to compost large-scale food waste. So, putting on our thinking hats, we developed a program such as the CCN to attempt at bringing composting to neighborhoods directly. So CCN currently supports 13 sites across the city. The goal is to have at least 25 over the next 2 years, where composting systems are currently located include community gardens, farms, schools, and residents are invited to compost their yard and food waste with their neighbors. So Farm Philly provides this network with constructed compost bins, all essential supplies, educational materials, and training. Next slide. The goals for this program include, very simply, to build the capacity of residents and gardeners, because those are essentially some of our main constituencies, to engage in composting by being a resource hub for community-led waste diversion and education for the environmental advantages of composting. We also have the goal of supporting neighborhoods to reduce their food waste and increase their recycling rate in a grassroots way. So when folks are engaging in composting, there's other multiplier benefits that you can get at, which is reducing waste, talking about recycling. So compost is kind of like a gateway to talk about larger issues of recycling in the city. Sharing best practices for the management of collective composting system. We're trying to get our sites to talk to each other, troubleshooting any issues that arise with pest management, nuisance issues, etc. And so this is a good way to get folks to talk to each other, which is sharing best practices, collecting data on each composting system, and the soil amendment that's, of course, generated by that. This helps us set a precedent for the city and also helps us find grant funding, et cetera, by showing a metric of the impact that we're making. So collecting data is important. Next slide. Our partners are an instrumental asset in this collective work. One of our first partners who I mentioned before, Institute for Local Self-Reliance, provides the co-training with and for us. PowerCore PHL, which is a local workforce development organization, builds the bins for us and in return creates a workforce development opportunity that is sustainability focused for their skilled trades crew. So virtually they're building us the bins and we take that into our programs, but they're also training up these folks in carpentry skills and all kinds of auxiliary benefits. And then of course, Parks and Rec is our home base and we have the political support behind or backing the project. So that's a definite must if you're looking to do something like this in your city. Next slide. Here are the sites that we have scattered throughout, and we hope to release a second application for the second cohort this year. And of course, the reason why I'm showing this is because you always want to map out where your impact is. You can see that it's a dry spell in the southern portion of Philadelphia, not for any reason in particular, except for the fact that there wasn't a lot of capacity there for sites to maintain their own composting operations. So this time around, we'll have to make sure that we make a concerted effort to do some outreach in the southern portion of the city to see if there's anyone willing to be able to bring on, this type of practice in their organization. Next slide. And just really quickly, a taste of what and how our cohorts learned in the past. I'm going to go through a few slides for the training. And because of COVID, and we're still in COVID, our trainings are now online. But in the before times, we were able to do some training sessions in person, which was extremely great. Some of the content that we talked about, Composting 101, data entry, community engagement, animals, and your compost bins. These are some of the workshops that we ran with our participants. Next slide. So here are just a few examples of what that looks like. Next slide. Folks understanding how to use thermometers. Folks here, we taught them lasagna method, donut method, how you compost within the composting bins, et cetera. Next slide. And so it was very engaging and folks were able to do this. And it was extremely fun and folks got very excited. So essentially always provide your folks with hands-on opportunities to learn. Partnerships for the win. Again, I don't think we could have ever done something like this without partnerships. I did the research to find the blueprints or specs as what we call it for the composting bins and to solidify our partnership with our partner. We had a pilot session where my team, their team, our partners, actually built a bin together so that we can understand the pinch points of the specs. Next slide. What were the issues? What didn't work? What did work, right? What materials did we think we needed to add on to those specs? So troubleshooting your specs before you build these bins. If you want to do something that has a cadence, right? If you want to do something that can be replicated multiple times, you got to get good specs and you have to troubleshoot them. Next slide. So again, I'm just going to fly through these pictures, but one more set of good looking people here. Next slide. Materials for success. Not everyone will be able to do this, but highly recommend that you provide tools necessary for success. We were able to provide hanging scale scrapers, shovels, pitchforks. If you have gardeners, even more so, you need to provide materials that are separate from gardening because composting can bring about certain types of bacteria. So you want to make sure that folks have separate tools for separate operations. And we provided all of this for free. Next slide. For those who were not able to get into our community compost network, or they don't live next to the 13 sites, we developed a community compost manual to provide residents models and literally directions of how you initiate and implement a community-led and driven composting program for your neighborhood. You can find this manual and other materials at farmphilly.org. Next slide. Really quickly, you can imagine that there's a lot of success with a program like this, but also we very much so need to learn from the challenges. These are just a few challenges that I think are very important. And then I'll wrap up for folks to consider if you're thinking about doing community composting programs in your city. Funding is the foundation of your program. If you don't have the funding to compensate collaborators or buy them tools, for example, or organizations for their time, purchase materials, bins or training, etc., delivering the materials. Remember, this is an operation that you're running. How are you going to deliver the materials? How are you going to procure them? How are you going to finance maintenance? These things could break down, even though they're pretty indestructible, they can break down. How are you going to finance it? You want to maybe reconsider your project start date if you don't have the funding behind it. Learning curve, starting a program that is city funded and community led requires everyone to be on the same page. Liability, right? The legality of the project that you're doing, maintaining and engaging residents about the project and how you do that all contributes to your success. And last but not least, with learning curve, succession planning for knowledge and maintenance transfer. The people that you started with in 2019 will not be the same people that you have in 2023. And that is okay. That's an okay reality. You want to make sure you instill in your sites that they have to have some plans for succession because people do move on. And last, operations. Planning for operations is key. This is especially important for city programs and partners with agencies that have a fleet. If you do not have a fleet, trucks, tools, people to build things, partner with the agencies that do. Each site having their own operations plan is imperative when introducing the site as a venue for accepting compost. Can you imagine if you put on the internet that, 1101 Parkway is accepting compost and the whole city floods them? It's not an operation that's feasible. So you have to make sure that your communication on how sites accept waste. Is it a cooperative model? Do you have to live within 4 blocks of the site? That's very important. Next slide. And last but not least, ultimately, composting is at the intersection of science, learning with community, climate change impact, waste reduction, environmental racism and justice. And Parks and Rec wants to make sure that residents understand that this type of grassroots approach to waste is having a direct impact on neighborhoods and landfills. And it, of course, is making a new, rich, low-cost resource for residents to participate in, learn the science behind and process behind it, et cetera. And it's very important to recognize that this work of reducing waste, because that's essentially core to this mission and composting in general, and creating these resources absolutely cannot be on the backs of residents only. Municipalities and government have to work diligently in creating these resources as well. And with that, the last slide is my email. Thank you so much, and happy to take any questions if they arise.
Thank you, Ash. What a wonderful presentation. And so last, but certainly not least, I do want to provide Jen Brown the floor to give a little overview of City of Philadelphia's Recreation Center composting program, a key element of the city's zero waste initiative. Jen, it's over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm Jen Brown. I'm the Community Compost Coordinator at Philadelphia Parks and Rec under Sustainability. Next slide. Most of you are familiar with zero waste initiatives or municipal waste reduction commitments. The City of Philadelphia has made the commitment of reducing waste by 90% by 2035. So we've got a long way to go. An estimate of 1.5 million tons of residential and commercial waste are currently produced here in Philly, which is nearly 1 ton for every resident. Next slide. Philadelphia Parks and Rec has many projects that work toward a more sustainable future for our residents and our ecosystem. The Sustainability Department of Parks and Rec currently manages these programs, so feel free to get in touch if you're interested to discuss any of them. But today I'm here to talk about the Rec Center Compost Program. Next slide. Okay, so on to the good stuff. The permit was the linchpin in this whole project. Several years ago, before my time at Parks and Rec, my predecessors, including Ash, wanted to expand and improve composting in the city. They realized that in Pennsylvania, the permits that existed for composting were only for very large and very small scale. So they worked with the DEP and formally submitted an amendment to the general composting permit WMGR 025 in 2020. So after several rounds of returns, that permit amendment was approved and granted in fall of 2022. So now it includes small to mid-scale composting. This is a huge win for Parks and Rec, but also for the whole state of Pennsylvania. This permit and therefore our program are replicable anywhere in the state. Next slide. While working to acquire the permit, Parks and Rec also put out an RFP, which was won by Bennett Compost. Bennett then joined us in the permit efforts, as well as coordinating around the site that they now operate, 5650 Rising Sun Avenue, which was formerly a Parks and Rec maintenance building. So until the permit was acquired, the site was not operational. So Bennett was patiently sending their food scraps and yard waste out for processing. But as of fall 2022, the site is operational and Bennett is composting their commercial clients and rec centers food waste there. They provide Parks and Rec with 75 yards of finished compost annually, allocated to sites as coordinated by Ash and the Farm Philly team. Next slide. My job is mostly managing the rec center compost program. So in addition to recruiting, onboarding, and problem solving with our rec centers, I also coordinate between Bennett and those rec centers. So I'm the Parks and Rec public side of our public-private partnership with Bennett. I work most directly with Tim, who founded Bennett Compost in 2009. Next slide. When I was hired in June of last year, we had around 20 active sites participating in the program, and we're now up to 50, with another 30 being recruited this fall, and every year moving forward until all of our roughly 150 rec centers with a food program are putting out food scraps for Bennett to collect and compost. Since 2021, Bennett has composted over 20 tons of food scraps just from our rec centers. Next slide. We are expanding the rec center compost program as evenly as we can across the city, incrementally year by year by district. I'm looking forward to showing these maps in a few years when we can show them as snapshots of how our program has grown. Next slide. Our public-private partnership enables us to collect food scraps from rec centers, educate youth and staff, return finished compost to Parks and Rec sites with gardens, and we also get to connect with other wonderful organizations and folks like you guys doing great work in sustainability, urban ag, and the intersection of so many incredible fields. Next slide. The educational component of this program has maybe been the most interesting and exciting for me. Here's one example of how we explain to the kids and staff what happens to the food scraps they place into the bucket. Next slide. We give each rec center 2 5-gallon buckets, although they can request additional buckets as well. We've also started to offer buckets with sawdust and little metal scoops so that they can add a layer of absorbent browns to their bin after a mealtime. Next slide. Because there are so many different methods of composting and different facilities can accommodate different materials, we explain what food scraps and yard waste can go into the bucket for Bennett specifically. We also educate the kids and staff about why some other systems might be different. For instance, if you're composting with a worm bin at home or a 3-bin system at a community garden, you wouldn't want to put meat, fish, dairy, bones, etc. But because Bennett uses an aerated static pile system, it can accommodate those materials. Although I can speak as one of their residential clients as well, that they ask us not to put meat in our buckets. So if anyone in Philly wants to get moving on a small to mid-scale biodigester system, that would be great. Thanks. Next slide. We also talk about greenwashing and how it can be confusing when something is advertised as being compostable, but it really depends on the system you're using to compost. Next slide. We teach the kids that if you can eat it, it's safe to put in the compost bucket. We play a game with thumbs up or down, whether or not you can eat the items on this list. Next slide. We then use the same list to discuss whether or not an item is organic, which is also how you know if you can put it in the bin. Next slide. We also talk about how the word organic is confusing. Next slide. We share with our rec leaders and staff other ways to deal with uneaten food at the rec centers. So if a meal is entirely untouched, it can be donated via the means program to someone who will eat it. We are working on improving participation with this program. Next slide. And it's a video, but you don't need to show it. So, okay, great. We encourage the staff at the rec centers to engage their kids in a variety of ways. And we're still learning a lot. We're brainstorming, adding to this list, and working to oversee more youth engagement across the sites, including a friendly compost competition and more. Getting to work with the rec leaders and staff, making personal connections about gardening and life cycles has been deeply meaningful to me. Working with the kids to learn about how they want to learn, and honestly, that they understand most of this stuff already, has been incredibly uplifting. I truly believe that educating entire generations of young people all over the city through the rec centers will have the ripple effect that we need to get back to the basics of not wasting valuable resources. Next slide. I am honored to be doing the work that I'm doing, and I am so grateful for opportunities like this to connect further. So please be in touch if you'd like to discuss anything in this presentation. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here, and for the People's Garden for hosting us at Parks and Rec.
Thank you so much, Jen, and thank you to all for attending this webinar, to all the presenters who came on and provided their valuable experience and resources. As we have mentioned, we will be sharing out the recording on usda.gov/peoplesgarden and other opportunities available to you all, to the people who have attended this webinar. Please follow up with any outstanding questions to the email ouaip@usda.gov. I'll stick it in the chat. And if we didn't get to your question in the Q&A box, we will follow up. So I just really appreciate, again, your all's attendance, and we will conclude this webinar. So thank you so much. Bye-bye.